Look up at the night sky for a moment and imagine that every single point of light represents not just a star, but a decision, a responsibility, and a future choice humanity has made about how it treats the universe beyond Earth. We often talk about space as if it is infinite and forgiving, but the truth is far more fragile, because the space surrounding our planet is becoming crowded, chaotic, and dangerously cluttered. In that fragile environment, every satellite launched is a promise, not only of progress and connection, but also of accountability. This is where the story of Starlink satellites burning up on purpose begins, not as an act of destruction, but as an act of discipline, foresight, and respect for what comes next. The idea that something so advanced, so expensive, and so carefully engineered is intentionally designed to end its life may sound strange at first, yet it reveals a deeper philosophy about innovation that values responsibility as much as ambition. Progress without responsibility is reckless, and the future has no room for reckless thinking. When Starlink satellites complete their mission, they are not abandoned to drift endlessly above our heads like forgotten relics of human ambition. Instead, they are guided home through a controlled process called deorbiting, a deliberate journey back toward Earth that ends in atmospheric burnup. As these satellites descend, friction with the atmosphere generates intense heat, causing them to disintegrate safely long before they can pose a threat to people or property on the ground. This process is not an afterthought. It is built into the very design of the satellites from the beginning. Every component, every material choice, and every orbital calculation reflects a commitment to reducing long-term orbital debris. In a world where thousands of satellites are being launched, that commitment matters more than ever, because space junk does not simply disappear. It accumulates, collides, and multiplies, turning Earth's orbit into a dangerous minefield that threatens future missions, scientific discovery, and even the global systems we rely on every day. The philosophy behind this approach mirrors a broader way of thinking about technology and its consequences. True innovation does not end at success. It ends at sustainability. Starlink exists to connect people, to bring high-speed internet to remote regions, and to close the digital divide. But none of that progress would mean much if it came at the cost of polluting space for generations to come. The decision to ensure atmospheric burnup reflects a belief that the future should be built with intention, not negligence. It is about understanding that every breakthrough creates new responsibilities, and that ignoring those responsibilities only pushes problems forward instead of solving them. This mindset echoes the broader vision often associated with Elon Musk, where long-term thinking is not optional, but essential, and where humanity is encouraged to think beyond immediate gains toward lasting impact. As Starlink satellites glide silently through orbit, they serve as reminders that technology is not just about what we can build, but about how we choose to let it go. Letting go is often harder than creating, because it requires humility, planning, and the courage to accept that nothing is meant to last forever. In the vast silence of space, abandoned objects become hazards, and neglected responsibilities become disasters waiting to happen. Controlled deorbiting is a form of closure, a respectful ending to a mission that has already delivered its value. It demonstrates that progress can be both bold and careful, ambitious and thoughtful, fast-moving yet deeply considered. This approach also sends a powerful message to the global space community. It says that leadership is not defined by how many satellites you launch, but by how well you manage their entire life cycle. It challenges other companies and agencies to think beyond deployment and ask harder questions about end-of-life planning. When satellites are designed to burn up safely, they are no longer symbols of waste or risk, but examples of stewardship. They show that humanity can explore, connect, and innovate without leaving permanent scars in the sky above. There is something quietly inspiring about this idea, because it applies far beyond space technology. In life, success is often measured by what we achieve, but rarely by how responsibly we conclude our efforts. The Starlink approach suggests a different measure of greatness, one that values foresight, accountability, and respect for the future. It reminds us that real progress is not loud or reckless, but intentional and enduring. As the satellites burn up in the atmosphere, unseen and unnoticed by most of the world, they complete their purpose with dignity, leaving behind not debris, but opportunity. In that quiet ending, there is a powerful lesson about how humanity can move forward, reach higher, and still leave space better than it found it. As humanity accelerates its push into space, a quiet tension begins to form beneath the excitement, a tension between expansion and consequence that few people stop to consider. Every launch carries hope, but it also carries risk, because the more objects we place into orbit, the more complex and fragile that environment becomes. At first glance, space looks endless, but Earth's usable orbital zones are limited, and once they are cluttered, they become dangerous. Invisible collisions can trigger chain reactions, turning a single mistake into thousands of high-speed fragments that threaten everything in their path. This is where suspense enters the story, not as science fiction, but as a very real possibility hanging over the future of space exploration. The question is no longer whether we can launch thousands of satellites, but whether we can do so without creating an irreversible problem that traps humanity on its own planet. Starlink exists at the center of this challenge, operating at a scale never seen before, and scale magnifies both impact and responsibility. Each satellite is part of a vast network designed to serve people on Earth, yet each one also occupies a shared orbital space that belongs to no single company or nation. This reality demands a higher standard of care, because mistakes made in orbit cannot be easily undone. A satellite left drifting becomes a silent threat, moving at speeds so extreme that even a tiny collision can be catastrophic. The fear of orbital congestion is not exaggerated. It is a growing concern among scientists and engineers who understand how quickly space can become unusable if debris spirals out of control. In that environment, the concept of controlled deorbiting transforms from a technical detail into a safeguard for humanity's future beyond Earth. What makes this moment so critical is that we are standing at a tipping point. Space can either become a sustainable extension of human activity or a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition. The difference lies in choices that are made quietly, long before disasters force change. Designing satellites to burn up in the atmosphere is one of those choices, a preventive action taken not because failure has already occurred, but because foresight demands preparation. Atmospheric burnup is not dramatic or visible to most people, yet it represents a deliberate effort to avoid a future crisis. It is a recognition that innovation must anticipate its own shadow, the unintended consequences that follow every technological leap. This philosophy becomes even more compelling when viewed through a broader lens of human behavior. Too often, progress is celebrated only at its peak, while its aftermath is ignored. We build, expand, and move forward, assuming that problems can be dealt with later, but later has a way of arriving unannounced and unforgiving. In space, there is no cleanup crew waiting to fix decades of neglect. Every decision compounds over time, and once debris accumulates beyond control, entire orbital pathways can become inaccessible for generations. That reality adds weight to every design choice and elevates responsibility from an option to a necessity. At the heart of this approach is a mindset that refuses to separate ambition from accountability. The influence of Elon Musk can be felt here, not just in the scale of the vision, but in the insistence that long-term thinking matters more than short-term convenience. Building a satellite that knows how to end its own mission safely is an acknowledgement that progress must have boundaries, and that those boundaries protect the future rather than limit it. It is easy to push forward without looking back, but it takes discipline to design systems that include their own conclusion. That discipline becomes a form of leadership, one that values continuity over conquest. The suspense deepens when we consider what happens if such discipline is ignored. A single collision can create a cascade of debris, multiplying threats and closing off access to space in a phenomenon scientists fear the most. Once that cascade begins, stopping it becomes nearly impossible, and the dream of widespread space-based technology could collapse under its own weight. Navigation systems, communication networks, and scientific missions would all be at risk, not because technology failed, but because responsibility was deferred. In that scenario, the cost of neglect would far outweigh the cost of prevention, and the opportunity to act wisely would be gone. Against this backdrop, the intentional burn-up of Starlink satellites feels less like an ending and more like a protective measure, a quiet intervention designed to preserve possibility. It is proof that progress does not need to be reckless to be bold, and that ambition does not require sacrifice of the future. Each satellite that safely exits orbit reduces the overall risk, creating space, quite literally, for what comes next. This ongoing cycle of launch, service, and responsible retirement establishes a rhythm that respects both innovation and environment. There is something profoundly human about this balance, because it mirrors the challenges faced on Earth as well. Resources are finite, systems are interconnected, and neglect often remains invisible until it becomes catastrophic. The lessons learned in orbit reflect lessons that apply everywhere, reminding us that foresight is not pessimism, but wisdom. By choosing to prevent debris instead of reacting to disaster, Starlink demonstrates a belief that the future is worth protecting before it is threatened. In that belief, tension transforms into trust, and suspense gives way to cautious optimism about humanity's ability to grow without destroying the very pathways that allow growth to continue. In the end, what truly defines progress is not how high we reach, but how carefully we prepare for what follows after the achievement fades into history. The deliberate burn-up of Starlink satellites is more than a technical solution. It is a statement about values, a quiet promise that exploration does not have to come at the expense of responsibility. As these satellites complete their missions and return to the atmosphere, they do so without spectacle, without applause, and without leaving scars behind. That silence is powerful, because it reflects a future where innovation is measured not only by what it creates, but by what it preserves. In a time when speed often overshadows wisdom, this approach reminds us that lasting progress is built on restraint as much as courage. The confidence inspired by responsible space practices comes from understanding that every system has a life cycle, and that ignoring the final chapter weakens the entire story. Starlink's approach treats the end of a satellite's mission as seriously as its launch, reinforcing the idea that accountability must exist from beginning to end. This mindset transforms technology into stewardship, turning engineers into caretakers of a shared environment that extends far beyond national borders. Earth's orbit is not owned, yet it is used by all, and protecting it requires cooperation, foresight, and humility. When satellites are designed to remove themselves safely, they honor that shared responsibility, ensuring that future innovators inherit opportunity instead of obstacles. This philosophy resonates deeply because it challenges the traditional narrative of success. Success is often portrayed as accumulation, growth, and permanence. But space teaches a different lesson. In orbit, permanence becomes a problem, and accumulation becomes danger. The wisdom lies in knowing when to let go, when to clear space for the next generation of ideas. By embracing atmospheric burn-up as a core principle, Starlink reframes success as something fluid, adaptable, and mindful of consequence. It suggests that real leadership is not about dominating space, but about making room for others to explore it safely. The inspiration behind this way of thinking reflects a broader vision associated with Elon Musk, where the future is not a distant concept, but a responsibility felt in the present moment. That vision insists that humanity must think beyond immediate gains and ask harder questions about sustainability, ethics, and long-term survival. Space is not just a frontier to conquer. It is a mirror that reflects how we handle power, knowledge, and ambition. If we cannot manage our presence just beyond Earth's atmosphere, it raises questions about how we will manage even greater challenges ahead. In that sense, controlled deorbiting becomes a test of maturity, a sign that humanity is learning to grow without leaving chaos in its wake. There is also a deeper motivational lesson hidden within this process, one that applies to individuals as much as it does to technology. Every goal, every project, and every chapter in life has an endpoint, whether planned or not. Ignoring that reality often leads to unresolved problems and unintended harm. Planning for a responsible conclusion, however, creates clarity and purpose throughout the journey. Just as a satellite performs better when its entire life cycle is considered, people perform better when they understand not only what they are building, but why and how it will eventually transition into something new. Letting go with intention is not failure, it is evolution. As Starlink continues to expand, the trust it builds is rooted in transparency and foresight. Viewers may never see a satellite burn up in the atmosphere, but they benefit from the peace of mind that comes from knowing the risk is being managed. That trust is earned through consistency, through decisions that prioritize the collective good over short-term convenience. It shows that ambition and responsibility are not opposites but partners, and that the most meaningful progress happens when they move together. This balance is what turns innovation into legacy, ensuring that today's breakthroughs do not become tomorrow's burdens. Looking forward, the story of satellites burning up on purpose becomes a symbol of hope rather than loss. It represents a future where humanity learns from its mistakes before repeating them, where expansion is guided by wisdom, and where exploration honors the environments it touches. Space does not forgive carelessness, but it rewards preparation, and the choices made today will echo for decades. By choosing responsibility now, Starlink helps keep the door to space open, inviting future generations to dream, discover, and build without inheriting a dangerous mess left behind. Ultimately, this story is not just about satellites or technology, but about mindset. It is about choosing long-term vision over short-term applause and thoughtful action over reckless speed. When we look up at the night sky and imagine what lies beyond, we are also imagining who we want to become as a species. The quiet burn-up of a satellite is a reminder that progress can be graceful, intentional, and respectful. It shows that humanity is capable of learning, adapting, and moving forward without abandoning responsibility. And in that lesson, there is motivation to apply the same care, discipline, and foresight to every challenge we face on Earth and beyond. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.